Welcome back to our channel. Thank you for being here. This is not just another story, it's a journey of survival, love, and quiet strength. Stay until the end to witness moments that may remind you of your own past. If you're new here, this channel is where real emotions live. Let's begin a new chapter together with Xiuhan and Lo still chasing hope. Xiuhan sat quietly as the storm outside echoed the one inside her heart. She had finally brought Yan home, but peace was still far away. The shadows of danger hadn't disappeared, they were just waiting. Tom was safe in her arms, but her eyes remained wide open. Every sound made her flinch, every breeze felt like a warning. Was it over, or just beginning? Could they rest, or were they just being watched from the dark? The night whispered questions only tomorrow could answer. That night, Xiuhan stayed awake, tending to Yan's fever and watching over Tom. But far from them, someone else was moving Dotmer, and had dropped everything to help. Somewhere in the shadows, danger was still searching, still hunting. What if the one they feared found them again? Would they survive it a second time? The silence in the house wasn't comfort, it was tension. A calm before another storm. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. Every click from you helps us continue telling stories like this, of courage, pain, and survival. Be part of this journey. Follow Xiuhan's path as she protects her child, searches for the truth, and faces the past she never asked for. Stay with us. After thanking the motorbike driver, then made his way back under the dim glow of streetlights. His heart was calm but alert. He wasn't just returning to a house, he was returning to protect the people he now cared about most. Xiuhan, little Tom, and fragile Yan were all under one roof, finally safe, for now. Thang chose not to sleep. He took his place outside the door, a silent guardian, ready for anything. The night was quiet, but then remained on alert. Then, out of the darkness, a man appeared, stepping closer with an aggressive stance. Then immediately stood up and blocked the path, voice steady but firm. He didn't know who the man was, but something about his presence felt wrong. In this house behind him were 3 lives he had promised to protect. There was no room for hesitation. Whatever this stranger's intent, Fan was ready. If Xiuhan hadn't rushed out just in time, this could have ended in disaster. The stranger was tense, his fists clenched, ready for a fight. Fan stood still, unsure if this was the danger he had been guarding against. But Xiuhan's voice cut through the tension like a thread of light in the dark. Her words saved everyone from what could have been a terrible mistake. She quickly explained everything, that Fan was a friend. Her words were firm, yet warm. Slowly, the tension drained from the man's shoulders. He lowered his hands. Xiuhan had once again protected those around her, not just with strength, but with understanding. Without saying another word, Xiuhan turned and quietly walked back into the house. The night seemed to settle again, like a curtain slowly falling after a tense scene. Fan stood outside for a moment longer, watching the shadows move beneath the trees. There was peace again, but only for now. In this fragile world they lived in, calm could vanish in an instant. But for now, she was safe. Fan turned to Mr. N, his voice low but firm. He said he wanted to take Xiuhan and her child back to her hometown immediately, afraid danger could strike again at any moment. But Murdah placed a steady hand on his shoulder, his gaze calm yet serious. He said, not now, this wasn't the right moment to make such decisions. There were too many unknowns, and right now, they needed rest more than plans. Yan slowly opened her eyes, the world still blurry and distant. But the gentle hands holding her and the warmth of the room reminded her she was safe. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her lips trembling. Xiuhan held her tighter, whispering that everything was all right. In that fragile moment, Yan wasn't alone anymore. She didn't need to run. She didn't need to hide. For now, love was stronger than fear, and that was enough. Then quietly brought over the warm bowl of porridge, his eyes filled with care. He had seen enough suffering to know how precious this moment was. Slowly, he fed her spoon by spoon, not rushing anything. Yen's eyes welled with tears, not from the fever, but from gratitude. In this small room, under a thin roof, strangers had become family. Life had knocked her down again and again, but this time, hands had reached out to catch her. And she let them. Zhuhan watched as Yen ate slowly, her chest rising with each fragile breath. For so long, she had been the one needing help. Now, she was the one offering it. Her heart ached watching her friend so weak, yet a quiet strength bloomed inside her. No matter how dark the road had been, this moment of light made it all worth it. Love wasn't loud, it was in the silence, the spoons, the shared tears. It was here, and it was real. Yen opened her eyes slowly, her voice soft but full of emotion. She looked at each person beside her and whispered, "Thank you. All of you. You've been so kind to me." Her lips trembled slightly, and her eyes welled up. She had been through so much, yet in this moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: safety. It was overwhelming. She gripped Zhuhan's hand tightly, like clinging to a fragile thread of hope that hadn't snapped. Murray knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything now," he said softly. "Just rest. Don't worry about anything anymore." His voice was calm but resolute, like a promise forged in silence. Yen looked at him with tears that held both fear and relief. Under the dim light of the porch, two men stood silently, one with arms crossed, the other with eyes scanning the shadows. They didn't speak much, but their presence was steady. Like pillars in a storm, inside the house were three souls too fragile to face danger again. Out. Here, they carried the weight of protection, quiet and shaken. Every rustling leaf raised their guard. Every breeze was a question, but they stayed, because sometimes love isn't loud. It's simply being there, no matter how long the night. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken worries, sleepless nights, and silent promises. They didn't need words to understand each other. Both knew what was at stake. If trouble came, it would meet them first. They stood guard not out of obligation, but because they chose to. Because they believed no harm should reach the ones inside, not while they were breathing. And so, in the thick of night, with hearts steady and feet rooted, they kept watch. Like shadows holding the line between safety and fear. The two men had fallen asleep while guarding the house. Their backs leaned against the bamboo wall. The night had been long, filled with silence and watchfulness. As morning light filtered through the leaves, little Tom's footsteps stirred them. He ran toward them with innocent curiosity, unaware of the tension that had kept them awake. Zhuhan gently placed her hand on Tom's shoulder, nodding toward the two men. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes spoke gratitude and understanding. She stepped closer to Mr. and quietly asked if they could talk for a moment. Mr. glanced at Then, who gave a brief nod and turned away. Whatever this conversation was, it belonged to them. They walked slowly toward the back garden, under the canopy of banana trees. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence was full, heavy with emotion. They stopped near the fence, where the world seemed quieter. Zhuhan looked away for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She didn't cry, but there was something behind her eyes that had already bled tears. "Mister," and reached for a leaf, tore it gently, and let it fall. Some wounds are passed through silence, and this one, whatever it was, had weight. He didn't interrupt her. He simply stood beside her, steady and unshaken. When they returned, Tom was tugging at Then's sleeve, asking for breakfast. Yen had fallen back asleep, breathing softer now. The morning felt fragile, as if the peace could break with a single wrong move. But something was different. There was unity, and unspoken understanding bound them. Murray glanced at Zhuhan with quiet reassurance. She nodded slightly. They were ready for whatever came next. The two men stood side by side, exchanging soft jokes to ease the tension. Their smiles were real, but their eyes remained vigilant. Even in this quiet morning, shadows of danger still lingered. They both knew the calm could vanish in an instant. Between laughter, they shared their worries about the women inside, the threats outside. It wasn't just kindness that connected them now, but duty. They were strangers no more. They were protectors, standing for something bigger than themselves. Before parting, They exchanged phone numbers, just in case, if anything happened again, they needed to be able to act fast. Trust wasn't something given easily, but it had been earned, Mr. And patted Thane's shoulder firmly, a silent promise in his gesture, then nodded, gripping his phone tighter. To men, once strangers, now bound by a shared purpose, they didn't say much more. But the understanding between them was stronger than words. Yen had regained color in her cheeks, her eyelids no longer trembling. The room, once thick with silence, now breathed with quiet joy. Zhuhan held her hand tightly, unable to hide the tears. Tom giggled, unaware he was part of something fragile and beautiful. Mr. N exhaled long and slow, as if releasing nights of worry. This wasn't just recovery, it was proof. They had survived another storm, and in that storm's quiet wake, love, raw and real, stood stronger than any danger ever could. They didn't speak much, just exchanged looks full of quiet gratitude. Yen held Zhuhan's hands tightly, as if passing on a kind of strength only women who've suffered understand. There were no promises, no plans. Just hearts that had touched and would never forget. The porch creaked under their steps. And behind them, memories lingered like incense smoke, faint, warm, and sacred. Tom was nestled in Than's arms, his tiny hand waving goodbye with innocent joy. He didn't understand much, but his wave carried warmth that softened the heaviness in their hearts. For the adults, every step from that doorway felt like leaving behind something precious. Dotmer and gave a silent nod, his eyes steady and kind. Zhuhan glanced back once more, memorizing everything, this house, these people, and the fleeting feeling of being safe, even if just for a while. As they walked away, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves could not silence the quiet ache in their hearts. But it was time. Danger was still out there, and home, even if uncertain, was where hope could start again. Each goodbye carried a prayer. Each tear held both sorrow and gratitude. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can give someone is a safe goodbye, and that was what they gave each other today. But is this really the end of their struggle? Or just a quiet pause before another storm? Zhuhan may have left this place behind, but danger doesn't ask for permission, it follows without warning. Can one act of kindness truly shield a family from what lies ahead? Or will fate demand more sacrifices? The answers remain unknown, but their hearts are ready for whatever comes next. Thank you for watching this episode. If Zhuhan's journey touched your heart, please click like and subscribe to Dayuhan RV. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Every view, every share helps us bring more human stories to light. Your support means the world to us and to Zhuhan. Stay with us, because the next step in her journey may change everything. After everything she's been through, loss, fear, and the warmth of unexpected kindness, Zhuhan is ready to go home. But what does home mean when your past is full of unanswered questions? Let's follow her steps, as a single mother carves her way through a world that's rarely kind to the gentle-hearted. Zhuhan packed her few belongings in silence, careful not to wake Tom. Before leaving, she handed Hong the small sum she had borrowed weeks ago. But Hong shook his head. He looked at the child sleeping in the corner and simply said, "Take care of him. That's all that matters." And in that moment, she realized not all debts are paid with money. Some are repaid through compassion, through love, through letting someone go with your blessing. With every step away from that house, Zhuhan felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter from the burdens she no longer had to carry alone. Heavier with the unknown future, and the weight of being everything to her son. But sometimes, walking away is the bravest act of all, especially when it means choosing love over guilt, and hope over fear. This is not an ending. It's the beginning of a woman finding her strength, one step at a time. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Dayuhan RV. Every comment, every share helps this voice reach someone else who might need it. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of Zhuhan's journey. Because sometimes, the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths, and we promise, what comes next will move you deeply. The room was quiet, but Zhuhan's heart was not. She looked around, trying to memorize every corner where she had once found peace. Leaving now felt wrong, knowing that Yen was still not out of danger. Her bags were packed, but her thoughts stayed behind. Every instinct in her body told her not to go yet. And perhaps she wouldn't. Not until she knew her friend was truly safe. Something deep inside her resisted goodbye, then stepped into the room quietly. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed worry. He knew what Zhu-Han was feeling, he felt it too. They both had grown close to Yen, and danger still circled like a shadow. Then sat beside her, speaking gently. "We're all worried about Yen," he said. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." Zhu-Han nodded, tears held back. In moments like this, friendship felt like the only armor they had, then suggested they meet Mr. and directly. Some things were too important for a phone call. Zhu-Han agreed. There were decisions to be made, and her heart needed answers. Not only about leaving, but about what they should do next together. Yen's life had changed all of theirs. And now, every choice felt more urgent than ever. They stepped outside, hearts heavy with worry, but also a quiet sense of purpose. Even Mer.anh, though swamped with responsibilities, had not left Yen's side. He found ways to balance work and watch over her. Zhu-Han admired that. The world still held people who cared deeply, who didn't turn away when things got hard. Yet the threat was real out there. Someone dangerous still roamed free. That truth weighed heavily on Zhu-Han. She couldn't leave yet. Not while the person who hurt Yen was still breathing free air. Then arrived at the cafe with a heavy heart. He had seen too much to stay silent, and felt too much to stay still. Across from him, Mr. N's eyes reflected the same storm, fear, guilt, and an urgency that words couldn't ease. They knew evil still lurked nearby, driven by money and capable of anything. If they didn't act now, they might regret it forever. The cafe felt warm, but danger was only a breath away. Then leaned forward, his eyes tense yet determined. He spoke softly, sharing a plan to trap the man responsible. They both knew it was dangerous, but letting fear win meant letting evil continue. Murren nodded slowly, then added his thoughts, his voice edged with worry. They weren't police, but their hearts couldn't turn away. This wasn't just about Yen anymore, it was about standing up for every woman hurt in silence. If they failed, who would be next? They agreed to act soon. Time was not their friend. They shook hands, no smiles, just the silent promise of men who had seen too much pain, as they left the cafe. The weight of their choice followed. The trap was risky, but letting evil run free was worse. For Yen, for Zhu-Han, for every innocent life they had to try. Fan and Mr. N arrived at Mr. Chin's house, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Chin opened the door with a scowl, ready to shut them out. He had every reason to be wary, but then stepped forward, calm but firm. They weren't here to threaten or beg. They came with a deal. A chance to help him out of the pit he was sinking in. Just 5 minutes of his time, that's all they asked for. Chin didn't answer yet. Murren placed an envelope of cash on the table. This wasn't a payoff, it was a promise. They knew Chin was drowning in debt, the kind that dragged a man to the edge. Then said softly, "If you help us bring that man here, we'll take care of what you owe." Every last coin. Chin's eyes darted between the money and their faces. He saw the risk, but he also saw hope for the first time in months. Chin hesitated. Calling that man meant danger, shadows he tried to avoid would come knocking again. But the promise of freedom was too tempting. Then added, "We're not just helping you, we're stopping something terrible from happening again." The silence stretched, heavy with decisions. Then Chin nodded once. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he picked up his phone. The digits weren't unfamiliar. Each beep was a step closer to either salvation or ruin. But it was too late to turn back now. As the phone rang, Chin closed his eyes. His voice trembled when the man answered. "Come over. We need to talk. It's about money." That was all he said, short, calculated. Murren and Than exchanged a glance. The trap was set, but neither celebrated. There was too much at stake. They knew this wasn't just a plan. It was a turning point. And if they failed, more lives could be lost. Merchin put the phone down. No one said a word. They handed Mr. Chin a small amount of money first, just enough to buy his trust. Every second felt heavy. Outside, Than and Mr. and crouched behind a bush, silently watching, holding their breath. They weren't just waiting, they were preparing. They knew the criminal would arrive soon, hungry for money and willing to kill. The plan was risky, but justice had no place for fear. And tonight, they had decided, was the night this monster would fall. The criminal finally showed up, face wrapped tightly under layers of cloth, as scanning the yard like a predator. He wanted the money, fast. But there was none in sight. He growled, his voice thick with threat, as he grabbed Mr. Chin's collar. "You think I'm here to wait?" he snarled. But Mr. Chin, for once in his life, stood his ground. He stalled, stuttered, wiped sweat from his forehead, and bought precious time. Outside, then tightened his grip. As the criminal lost patience, his rage exploded. He shoved Mr. Chin aside and reached into his coat, pulling out a hammer with trembling hands. "Mer," and signaled. Then nodded. In a blink, they split, one from each side. The criminal swung wildly, cornered and feral, but then lunged low, tackling his legs, while Mr. and wrestled the weapon from his grip. It was fierce. Grunts, chaos, blood on their sleeves. For a moment, it seemed over until he twisted free. The moment exploded in chaos. Mer and Anthan had split up earlier, hiding behind opposite corners of the yard. When the masked man lost patience and lunged toward Mr. Chin, then charged forward, tackling him with full force. The two wrestled violently, dust and rage filling the air. But this wasn't just a fight. For Than, this was protection. For Zuhan, for Yen, for Tom. Every punch thrown was a scream, no more fear, no more running. Murren joined the fray, locking the attacker's arm, trying to hold him still. But the man fought like a cornered animal, eyes wild with desperation. Than's heart pounded, not from fear but from urgency. They had to stop him now. Not for glory, but for peace. Yet as the seconds ticked, the masked man slipped sweat, fury, and chaos, allowing him to wriggle free. In a blur, he broke from their grip. The thug suddenly kicked Mr. and hard in the stomach and made a run for it. Pain surged through Mr. An's body, but he clenched his jaw and sprinted after him. Every step burned, but he knew what was at stake: Zuhan, Yen, and their fragile safety. He couldn't let that monster disappear again. His breath was sharp, his heart pounding, but his determination cut through everything else like a blade through fog. They crashed into a narrow alleyway, limbs tangled, fists swinging. The criminal roared, clawing to break free, but Mr. and held on with everything he had. In his mind were all the nights Zuhan cried herself to sleep, all the fear in Yin's eyes. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting for peace, for two women who deserved better than a life spent running from shadows. But just when it seemed Mr. and might win, the thug twisted violently and slammed him into the wall. Mr. and stumbled, gasping, strength fading. That split second could have ended it all until Than appeared, breathless, eyes blazing. Without a word, he joined the struggle. 2 against 1, the thug thrashed harder. Desperate now, but together, they locked him down, inch by inch. With Than's added strength, they pinned the thug against the ground. His rage turned to panic, but it was too late. An's face was drenched in sweat and pain, but his eyes burned with quiet triumph. He didn't care about the bruises, the blood, or the torn shirt. What mattered was that Zuhan and Yen could sleep one more night in peace. One more night without fear. Just in time, the police arrived, sirens cutting through the chaos. Than and Mr. and helped restrain the criminal, guiding him toward the waiting vehicle. The man thrashed once more, but there was nowhere left to run. A strange quiet filled the air. They didn't speak, only nodded. The fight wasn't just physical. It was for everything the women inside that house had suffered through. Justice, for once, had come knocking. As the police drove away with the criminal, Than and Mr. and turned back toward Mr. Chin's house. There were still things to collect: evidence, the weapon, pieces of truth. But when they arrived, the front gate was ajar. The house was silent, eerily so. Inside, every drawer was empty, every item gone dark. Chin had vanished. Bags packed, doors left open, no sign of return. It was a silence that screamed betrayal. Just as they turned away, a flash of movement caught their eyes. Chin, bag slung over his shoulder, was sprinting down the alley. Then and Mr. N exchanged a look, then bolted after him without a word. Footsteps echoed between the buildings. He was fast, desperate, and perhaps hiding more than they imagined. Each turn they took narrowed the distance. But what was Mr. Chin really running from? The police, or something darker waiting in his past? Was this the end of his story, or just another beginning? What was hidden in the bag he carried? And if he was desperate enough to flee, what else might he do? The danger hadn't passed yet. If anything, it had only changed its face. And now, more than ever, they had to be ready. Thank you so much for watching today's video on Dayohan RV. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to unfold: truths buried, fates tangled, and the strength of those who keep moving forward. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a chapter. Because in the next episode, what Mr. Chin is hiding might be far more dangerous than anyone imagined. We return with a heart heavy with questions and a silence that feels unfinished. We thank you for walking this journey with us, one truth at a time, one tear at a time. Your support means everything, because this is not just a story. It's a reflection of the people we love, the justice we seek, and the humanity we share. Now let us uncover what still lies hidden in the shadows. Mur and An Than stood in silence, staring at the direction where Chin had escaped. So many things were left unsaid, so many knots still tied in the dark. Had they reached the root of the evil? Or just scratched the surface? Every breath felt like a warning. Every second without answers a quiet threat. The men may have fled, but the danger still lingered. Because when truth runs too deep, it takes more than courage to dig it out. If this journey has moved your heart, please show your support. Click like, subscribe to Dayohan RV, and turn on the bell for updates. Every view, every comment, every share helps us continue telling these untold stories. Let's shine light on the shadows together, because somewhere out there, another Yuhan might still be waiting for justice. Your voice could be the one that changes everything. Murda Chin was once a gold miner, chasing luck through mud and sweat. Life never handed him grace, it handed him debts, betrayal, and hard choices. In a desperate moment, cornered by loan sharks and mounting pressure, he sold his own child. It wasn't out of hatred. It was hunger, fear, and survival. He believed it was the only way to stay alive. But some decisions echo through a man's soul forever, no matter how far he runs. He tried to bury that past with silence. But every time he saw a girl like Yuhan or Yen, something inside him cracked. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the memory of a daughter he once held in his arms. Or maybe it was the man he could have become if life had been kinder. Regret lived behind his eyes, but it never softened him. It only made him better at hiding, bargaining, and surviving. When Than and Mr. N approached him, he saw another chance, maybe to fix a little piece of what he had broken. But fear lingered in every decision he made. If he called the wrong man, it could mean violence, revenge, even death. Yet greed and desperation blurred his judgment. He needed that money. He needed to escape the mess he'd created. So, he picked up the phone, ignoring the tremble in his hand, and made the call anyway. Deep down, Mr. Chin knew redemption wouldn't come easy. He had burned bridges, buried truths, and traded love for survival. Even now, as he helped bait a man he once feared, part of him wondered, was this justice, or just another betrayal? In every footstep that followed, in every decision, he carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of pain. He wasn't a monster. He was a man shaped by survival. But survival leaves scars that don't always heal. Where could Mr. Chin possibly go? A man with nothing left but his past rarely runs aimlessly. He's either hiding from consequences or returning to where it all began. Maybe he fears exposure. Maybe he's protecting something or someone. His escape felt too rehearsed, too timely. It wasn't panic. It was intention. Calculated, silent. And that's what makes it terrifying. What secrets does he still carry? What unfinished business still ties him to danger? Could he be more than just a frightened old man? His past connects him to dark corners of this story: illegal gold mining, debts, missing people. What if he wasn't running away, but clearing the path for something darker? A bigger plan? Or someone else still hiding in the shadows? His disappearance raises more questions than answers. Sometimes, the real villain isn't the one who shows his face, it's the one who disappears when the truth gets too close. There's something unsettling about silence after chaos. Chin's absence feels too quiet, like the calm before another storm. Maybe he's gone for good. Or maybe he's watching from somewhere, waiting for his moment. A man who once sold his child is capable of more than we dare admit. And if this is only the beginning, then those who remain must be ready not just for answers, but for the consequences they bring. Anh returned quietly to the small house where Yin was resting. The weight of recent events still lingered in his breath, but seeing the warm glow from the window reminded him why it was worth it. Hong stood outside, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting. Their eyes met, no words needed at first. In that moment, both men knew something had shifted. Evil had been caught. But what came next? Neither of them could yet define. They sat on the porch together, letting the silence speak for them. Hong broke it first, asking about what happened, and shared only the necessary parts: the chase, the capture, the narrow escape. Hong nodded slowly, absorbing each word. His eyes reflected a quiet respect, not just for the outcome, but for the courage it took to face such darkness. There was relief, yes, but also an unspoken fear that danger doesn't always end with an arrest. Hong looked at Mr. An said quietly, "I've seen men run toward danger, but few run toward it for someone else." Mr. An didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked at his hands, still trembling faintly from the fight. "It's not just about Yin," he said at last. "Sometimes, protecting someone makes you face the part of yourself you've been hiding from." Hong nodded, eyes heavy with understanding. "You still think it's not over?" Hong asked. Mr. An let out a slow breath. "The one behind all this may still be out there, Mr. Chin ran for a reason. People like him don't run unless they're afraid of something bigger." Hong crossed his arms again, lips pressed into a tight line. "If it ever comes back," he said, "you won't be alone. Not again." A flicker of gratitude passed between them, wordless but clear. Mr. An stepped quietly into the house, where Yen was resting. She looked up, eyes tired but soft. He knelt beside her, gently adjusting the blanket on her shoulders. "You're safe now," he whispered. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Sometimes, silence carries more than words ever could. His hand didn't let go of hers. It stayed there, firm and warm like a promise. That no matter how dark things got, he would never walk away. He poured a glass of water and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, hands still weak. "Mr. And watched her every movement, as if memorizing her presence, afraid it might vanish again. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said softly. "Just rest. Let me carry the weight this time." Yen closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down. In that quiet moment, she felt seen, not as a victim, but as someone worth staying for. The sun had just risen, casting a warm glow on the front yard, then stood beside Yuhan, both silent for a moment. "I'm still worried for Yen," she whispered, then nodded slowly. "But she's strong, and she's not alone anymore." Yuhan looked down, her fingers gripping the bag strap. "This place, it gave us more than shelter." Then gently smiled. "It gave us people who still believe in kindness." Yuhan turned to Then, eyes full of emotion. "We survived things I never thought we could." He looked at her, proud and protective. "You were the one who carried us through," he said. She shook her head, tears close. "No. We carried each other. The morning breeze stirred the trees, as if the world was quietly watching their goodbye. Every goodbye left behind a trace of memory, and this one carried a gentle ache. Than reached for the small envelope in his pocket. This is the money we borrowed. I wanted to return it. Xiuhan placed her hand over his, stopping him. Let's leave that with home. It's his kindness we carry. They both knew the debt was deeper than bills. It was a debt of grace, of trust. In the stillness of the yard, words became unnecessary. Their shared silence spoke more than anything else could. Hong stepped through the gate, surprised to see Then and Xiuhan already packed. You're leaving? He asked, then nodded gently. I have to return to work. It's time we go. Xiuhan smiled, though her eyes carried warmth and sorrow. We heard what happened. Thank you for everything. Hong's face softened. This house will always be open for you. In that moment, no one needed to explain how much it all meant. They sat down briefly, just to savor a few last minutes together. Hong brought out tea, his hands trembling slightly. After all this, I'll miss the laughter. And even the silence, he said. Xiuhan touched his arm. You gave us more than a roof, you gave us peace. Then added, we'll never forget it. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, as if bowing to a quiet goodbye. And inside, three hearts held a memory no storm could wash away. Hong looked at Than with quiet understanding. You've got a life to rebuild. But don't carry everything alone. Then lowered his gaze, nodding. I won't. Xiuhan chimed in, her voice soft. And if one day you need us, just call. There was no promise of when they'd meet again, but in the eyes they shared, there was something stronger than time, a bond forged in storms, in kindness, and in silent compassion. With one final bow of gratitude, Then and Xiuhan stood to leave. Tom clutched his toy tightly, sensing the shift. Hong knelt and ruffled the boy's hair. Be good, little man. As they stepped toward the gate, Hong's voice called out once more. This isn't goodbye. Just see you when the time is right. The path ahead was long, but their hearts carried something priceless, a sense that, even in farewell, they were not alone. Just as peace began to return, Xiuhan received a mysterious call. A distorted voice whispered through the phone, saying he never forgot and never forgave. Her hands trembled, heart racing as she looked out the window. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Maybe the storm hadn't passed. Maybe danger still lingered, waiting in silence. With Tom asleep, she quietly locked the door. Whatever came next, she knew the past was not done with her yet. Every journey ends with more questions than answers. As the bus disappeared into the mist, Xiuhan held Tom close, eyes lost in thought. What future awaited them? Could peace finally come, or was another storm waiting just beyond the hills? Life never gives easy endings, only new beginnings. Don't forget to hit like, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to follow what happens next in Xiuhan's journey.